Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Front Page on GNAT TV. My name is Andrew McKeever, the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. It's my distinct pleasure to have with us here in the studio a special guest, Jim Baker, who's the chief of the Rutland Police Department. Jim, welcome back
thank
to
you,
GNAT.
Andrew. It's good to be back.
Good to have you here.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, you know, you're doing some amazing things up there in Rutland, and also folks down here in Manchester remember you from a time when you were the chief down here, and also the chief of the Shaftesbury Barracks of the Vermont State Police. So, you know, the bad news, I guess, is that we're losing you to a new post.
Sort of, but not really, you know.
Well, congratulations, first of all, on that opportunity. And I guess just to kind of get things started, tell us a little bit about what that job is going to involve. You're going to be taking over a position with the International Association of Police Chiefs?
It's known as IACP. It's a membership-driven nonprofit organization. It's been in existence since the late 1800s. I've been around the association for about 15 years. It represents law enforcement leaders all over the world. And you know, the model of the organization is serving today's leaders and developing tomorrow's leaders. And I'm taking over a position known as the Director of Law Enforcement Operations and Support. I'll have a staff of about 22. The exciting part of it is that the staff is a lot of 30-some-year-olds that come from educational backgrounds like Tufts and Georgetown and George Washington University, and most of them have master's degrees. And we focus on national and international issues, policy development, research around contemporary issues in law enforcement, and we manage several grants from several different locations, including the Department of Justice.
Wow.
So it is a fascinating position, and it's kind of a nice way to transition from operational law enforcement, but still be involved. And I've always had an interest in working on some national issues. And inside this group are a couple areas that I have a real fond interest for, including we run what's known as the Wellness Center, which is a center that does research and policy development and best practices around safety of police officers. And the safety of officers has been a passion of mine for years.
So, Jim, when you took over the police department in Rutland in January of 2012, my impression anyway was that the police force up there was in some measure of disarray. You had a lot of issues going on, and I guess I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about, you know, what you did to kind of fix that situation. Because right now it seems like that police department up there is operating at a very high level.
I appreciate that comment. You know, this is the second time in my career after I retired from the state police that I found myself in a situation where I was asked to step into a situation that was very challenging. There were a lot of challenges in the police department. You know, the other situation was when I went to the police academy in 2010. But I've also always prided myself on not talking about prior administrations and what happened. I will say at the Rutland City Police Department, they had clearly lost their way. And they had lost their way primarily because the structures, the processes, the policies just were not consistent. And the biggest issue was, and I'll try to make this connection to see if people can make the connection, but I think as we sit here, you know, taping the show, getting ready to broadcast it, the country's waiting for what's going to happen in Ferguson.
Right.
And the situation in Rutland wasn't much different in Ferguson. Thank God we didn't get into a situation like that, but we had a broken relationship with the community. The community had absolutely no faith in the police department. The worse that got, the harder the police tried, the harder they policed the community, the more aggressive they got in the community, and it just deteriorated the relationships. And then it got to the point where I think some of the folks that were working there thought that when questioned about the operations of the police department, they thought the answers that you used to give in 1970, such as, well, I said so, we're going to work. And it doesn't work anymore.
Times have changed.
And rightfully so it doesn't work, because you know, every community who pays for a police department deserves to get the absolute best they can for their tax dollars. And so that's what I found, and I won't get into all the personnel issues. When you ask me, how did we get to where we are now? There's 52 total employees in the department, 40 sworn and 12 civilian, and I've hired 30 new employees in 3 years. And sometimes I have a good friend of mine who does some management work, and who I often call on for advice. And one time he made this statement to me: how do you change people? You have to change people. And so we put in place very clear mission, vision, a value system, core values. And every employee that I hire, I spend time with them and I ask them, can you live within our mission and vision, and are you willing to accept our core values as your values? And if they can't, then they can't work there. And many of the people that are no longer working there that may have left not on their own thought process, because they didn't fit our value. They didn't fit our value system, which really are reflective of the values of the community.
Well, of course, the other thing that was going on in Rutland during that same time, as just about everybody knows, is the fact that it seemed like there was a major opiate, heroin epidemic sweeping through the town. I mean, every time you picked up the paper, there'd be a story about somebody being arrested for dealing illicit drugs of one kind or another, and heroin was obviously right at the front of that. So, in response to that, you initiated what I guess is called Project Vision.
Correct.
How is that working, number one? And I guess explain it to us a little bit. Is it community policing like you were just referring to? They're getting kind of on the street level with folks who are living in neighborhoods and understanding what's going on and getting good communication flowing back and forth?
It's all of that. But let me just take you back to the opiate problem. You know, this opiate problem is not a Rutland problem. The difference in Rutland was that what I found was the community was looking at the police department to solve this problem. And the underlying issues of substance abuse, in particular opiate-based substance abuse, so many of the underlying issues have absolutely nothing to do with the police department. Dysfunctional family, mental health issues, poverty. We know historically now, I have not met a single person yet that I've talked to who's addicted to powder heroin that did not start with pharmaceutical medication. And the stories are very similar. Back injury from a car accident, had back surgery, had some type of traumatic event where they were being treated with opiates, became addicted. Medical staff cuts them off from their medication. They start buying pills illegally for a while. It became so expensive, next thing you know, they're in powdered heroin. None of those issues has anything to do with the police department. The problem was the community, every time something was go wrong, an armed robbery, a spree of car burglaries, a spree of burglaries in the city, a spree of vandalisms that were driven by the opiate problem, the community's looking at the police department. So what would we do? Goes back to what I said earlier. We'd start policing the community harder. So when I got into the city, I also started making contact with a lot of the nonprofit organizations. And I've been very blunt about this, so I'll be blunt now about it. What I found was that many of the nonprofits were fighting behind the scenes with each other because there's limited dollars. And so, you know, every dime that's on the floor, people are fist fighting over the dime on the floor. And there wasn't a coordinated vision for the city about how we were going to move forward. The original conversation that got started, that was the pre-runner to Project Vision, was what we were describing as a community intervention team. And the concept was that we would take the various nonprofits and other organizations that had some role in trying to get our arms around this problem and start meeting with them on a regular basis. And that's what we did. That eventually morphed into us turning the second floor of the police department into what is now called the Vision Center, where people said, well, I'll put a social worker there. Rutland Mental Health said, well, we'll put a crisis worker there. The Attorney General's office said, we'll send a prosecutor down 2 days a week to do focused prosecution on the people who are doing the most harm to the community. The Violence Against Women Network put a advocate there, and that was the forerunner. Then we had a chance to apply for a federal grant that we applied for, and this was the tipping point in Rutland was in September of 2012. You know, we lost one of our very bright stars, and it's well documented. And the individual that was involved in this has been charged with murder. Carly Farrell was killed, leaving her place of work. She represented everything that was wonderful about the community. All-star golf player, volunteered at several nonprofits. She worked several jobs. She had a very, very bright future. She represented everything that was wonderful about the community. The guy that allegedly hit her in the car, huffing aerosols in a can, represented everything that was wrong with the community. And that tipping point happened, and we applied for a federal grant that we never got, but we had to come up with a name, because the feds always love a name. So we gave it this name, and I can't even remember what vision stands for as I sit here now, because I usually have to write that down, and I forgot to write it down. We were about ready to push the button at 11 o'clock at night, midnight deadline on the grant. We were about ready to push the button. We go, hey, we got to have a catchy name. And we came up with Project Vision. And it stuck. And so what's happening now in the community is once a month, we have anywhere from 75 to 100 folks meet. They're working in 3 subcommittees. We have tied the change to the city directly to changing the environment in the city, including blighted housing, the way neighborhoods look, the way neighbors interact with each other in neighborhoods. There's one committee that works on that. There's a public safety committee, and then there's a prevention, treatment, and education committee. And we've set universal goals for the city, benchmarks that we've all agreed we can hit. And we're hitting those. And we're slowly using Project Vision. Now you have the Vision Center where you have these folks on the ground doing the work, and then this overarching group called Project Vision that's giving guidance to the work that's being done in the community.
Well, what are some of those benchmarks? I mean, how do you measure progress and stuff like this? It can't be just simply the number of arrests or prosecutions.
That's right.
How do you measure whether or not you're succeeding or not?
I think, and I'll get back to what we're doing police-wise in a minute, but I think, Andrew, you just touched on something that is the overarching conversation inside the police department. I don't really care if we ever arrest anybody again for possession of heroin. Now, I'm being a little facetious when I say that. Of course we do, because we want to interrupt those markets that are coming from New York, which is primarily our source of supply in Rutland City. We want to interrupt those markets. We're more interested in measuring the things that are affecting the citizens in the community. So, January in 2012, 2013, we were having a significant amount of armed robberies. That's a problem. If you're going out to the store to get a gallon of milk and you walk in and interrupt an armed robbery with an opiate-addicted person with a handgun, that's not a good thing. And that's not good for the community. I measure, in my mind as the police chief, we've been measuring those things. We've also been measuring things such as, how many babies are being born at the hospital that are opiate-addicted. Those are true measurements that will prevent downstream problems, raise the quality of life in the city, and as I've said all along, part of my job is to create an environment where Rutland can market itself economically and bring business and opportunities into the city. And I don't know if you've been to downtown Rutland lately, but it doesn't look like it did 5 years ago. It's the feeling on the street is entirely different now than it was, 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I have been up in Rutland recently, and
it's hard to find a vacant storefront.
The change is palpable. I mean, I remember going up there 4 or 5 years ago and feeling like, whoa, this is kind of semi-scary.
The police department plays a significant role in that, and that's part of the messaging we've been doing.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to take you back to the police department is everybody's doing their thing in a coordinated effort. And inside the police department, we have one of the things that we did do. We asked for no more police officers when I got there. In fact, we're going into budget cycle right now. Before I leave, I'll be testifying in front of the aldermen on the budget, and I'm going to remind them that when I got here, it's a tough budget year, like it is in a lot of places. It's not the time to wave the white flag or wave the victory flag that we've made enough progress now that we can stop. We never asked for more police officers. We didn't increase the number of police officers by one. What we did increase is 2 civilian positions. One to do with evidence handling, which is another systematic problem that was wrong in the police department, which caused a lot of the problems that were there. The other one was we have a full-time crime analyst now. And what we focus on is who's causing the harm in the community. So I often say this. We know it's somewhere around, corrections has under supervision somewhere around 350, 400 people in the city. There's people that are on the sexual registry. There's people who have restraining orders against them. So we think that probably in the city, there's 500 to 600 people that we ought to worry about. The city's population is somewhere around 16,500, 16,600. I often say inside the building, pay attention to the 600 people that are causing problems and leave the other 16,000 alone. Because we believe that the way we've been able to move some of the activity in the city south is focusing on those individuals that are causing the harm in the community.
It all sounds similar to the approach that William Bratton took in New York City back in the 1990s, where he used a lot of data to target, certain precincts that were, causing where 90% of the crime would come from 10% of the, or roughly. Did I take it that your project vision?
That's part of it. We've worked pretty closely with a gentleman by the name of David Kennedy. Professor Kennedy is from John Jay College in New York. In fact, Professor Kennedy has been retained by the Justice Department on the heels of Ferguson to retool police community relations in the country. We've worked with Professor Kennedy pretty closely. He was in the city about a month ago, gave a public presentation, and he developed what's known as a drug market intervention strategy, and that's exactly what it is. And that's where we learn this from. If you want relationships in your community, writing someone a ticket for not using their directional signal is not going to build real close relationships, especially if it's that guy or gal that's working 2 or 3 jobs to pay their taxes, support their family. Aggressive traffic enforcement has a role, but it shouldn't be used to create an environment where you're creating a police state. And I will say, when I came to Rutland, that was one of the cornerstones of what the problem was in our relationship with the community. It is a Bratton strategy. So every 2 weeks, just like Bill Bratton in New York runs a ComStat meeting, we run what we call a RutStat meeting, and we take a look at geographic locations. And we started out with any call for service of 3 or more at a given location in the prior 2 weeks. We analyzed what the source of that problem was. Sometimes it was domestic, sometimes it was juvenile. So all those stakeholders I described to you earlier in the room, if it's a juvenile problem, we're now talking with the social workers about how we're going to intervene into that juvenile problem. It's been so successful that a month ago, we didn't have enough calls every 2 weeks to show 3. We're now down to 2. And we're going to keep drilling that down. And I could go through a list of a half dozen locations in the city. By doing this, we've changed the entire environment, and we have no calls for service at those locations anymore.
You must get a lot of calls from other police chiefs over around Vermont saying, hey, how'd you do it, and how can I learn more about it? Because Rutland isn't the only community in Vermont that's had a heroin problem or a crime problem. I mean, a lot of towns around the state have those issues too. I mean, has there been much interest among some of your colleagues?
There is. I know. We've talked with South Burlington, Springfield. Burlington does something very similar to us, and I know that South Burlington and Springfield are about ready to enter into a contract with the organization that we use to help us do the manipulation of the data. That's not a good term, manipulation of the data. The analysis of the data, because we can laugh about that, but one of the things that we've been very dedicated to in Rutland is not sugarcoating what our problem is. And I think some communities in Vermont and around the country, this is where you get into some conflicts. My friends in the Chamber of Commerce don't like it when I talk really candid about what's going on. But I'm a firm believer you can't solve a problem until you understand what it is. And I think we've proven that in Rutland. It isn't that we don't have heroin in the city, we do. We have serious issues still in the city, but we've set a culture amongst the population that has caused the problems in the past, that your behavior is no longer accepted not by the police department, by the community. It makes a big difference.
Looking somewhat more locally here, right in our area, there's been a dialogue going back and forth between town leaders in Manchester and Dorset about combining regional services, police being one of them, fire, rescue being others. I guess I just wondered, what is your take on that? Do you see that as a promising or nothing else necessary kind of way to go in the future? I mean, given financial constraints that maybe coming down the road, does regional policing have a future, or is it going to be kind of drilling down a rabbit hole here?
Well, I'm a big supporter of regionalization. I have been for 10 years. The problem, this conversation is absolutely no different than what's going on inside our educational system right now.
Yeah, very similar.
It's a very similar conversation because it's about local control. It's about getting what you pay for. It's about people not wanting someone else to tell them how their community will be provided public safety. Because in the Manchester situation, it's more than just policing. It's a public safety study. I think sooner or later, Andrew, just like we've been on this train now for 15 years with the educational system. Even in my hometown of Arlington, I know when the conversation was going on about merging down there, and the fight was up against that. I understood why folks in town were doing that. I wasn't on the school board, but the reality of it is, sooner or later, Arlington will be forced to merge with someone, because we can't continue to pay the type of property taxes we are. I think the conversation around policing and public safety is exactly the same. And when it tips, I don't know. But I'm a big fan of it. I was a fan of it when I was a colonel of state police, because I think it puts the state police in a very difficult position to have the kind of expectations that are on them that just can't be met. You can't cover the number of towns that the Shasberry Barracks covers with the number of personnel that are there. It's just the math doesn't support it.
It seems like you guys are spread very thin. I mean, every community expects to get coverage from the state police at some point or other, or whenever there's a crime or something happens, and yet there are just a limited number of resources there.
Yeah, and I think, because I can say this now because I'm not in state government, but I think there were opportunities that were out there at a given time. One of them was a study that was done probably around 2008. And the consultant in that study, I think, took the easy way out. They didn't make real hard recommendations, and it left too much wiggle room for policymakers who want to protect their own turf to avoid dealing with it at the time. I think eventually, it's like education, it's going to come to it. Yeah. It's very expensive to provide public safety, very expensive.
Just to close, is that do you feel like the biggest issue that's facing police organizations around the state, the lack of resources, lack of funding, or is there something else that keeps you awake at night when you think about this?
I think I was fortunate enough to give the keynote address at the Academy graduation on Friday. I guess it was my swan song for Vermont. Andrew, I think the biggest challenge right now for law enforcement in Vermont across the country is I have never seen law enforcement being scrutinized the way it is now. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just making a statement. And I think in some ways that elected officials and others have set a bar of transparency for police agencies that no other public organization is being held to. And you never hear anyone talk about transparency, or you don't hear legislators when they're talking about passing laws around transparency talk about the education system or lawyers or doctors. They're talking about police officers. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think the playing field is not level for policing right now. And it puts an enormous amount of stress on the systems. It puts an enormous amount of stress on law enforcement. And that kind of stress isn't fair sometimes when people are depending on social media, Facebook and other outlets to make decisions on what they really think happened in an incident. And I'll end it by saying this. I read a column in the Boston Globe about a month ago, one of the columnists, who she described in some great detail what happened at Ferguson. And when I'm reading, I'm saying to myself, how the hell does she know what happened at Ferguson? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have national contacts all over the country. I don't know what took place between Michael Brown and Officer Wilson on that street in Ferguson, but somehow she took it upon herself to put that in an article. That kind of stuff becomes factual, and then every police officer is judged against what someone describes in an article they think or they represent happened at a scene that they have no direct personal knowledge about. I think it's a very challenging environment, but as I said to the recruits Friday at graduation, it's a great profession, it's an honorable profession, I've had now close to a 39-year run in Vermont, and I'm proud to have served shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement in the state. And I think that's the challenge we face right now, and I think it'll work itself out, but it makes it very difficult to be in the business right now.
That's interesting. That answer I didn't expect at all. But anyway, Jim, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you in. And good luck in Washington.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you. I'll be around. I'm still living in Arlington. I'll be commuting, so I'll be
We'll still see you around.
You
huh?
will.
Just don't give me a speeding ticket, okay?
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for watching. This has been Front Page on GNAT TV. Andrew McKeever here with Jim Baker today, the Chief of the Rutland Police, former State Commandant with the Vermont State Police. If I got to mention that at the start, my apologies.
No problem.
But obviously a very distinguished person here in our state and within the law enforcement community. Have a great day. Thank you for watching. We'll see you the next time.